Hola. Toma, escuchar por acá porque si no con el ruido de la falda.
Hola,
Hola, boa tarde. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Pamela y estoy trabajando
Hola.
con... Hola, hola. ¿Cómo se escucha?
Estamos escutando bem.
Un placer que estén conectados en este momento. Muchas gracias. Estamos a poquitos minutos de comenzar. Estamos a poquitos minutos de comenzar porque siguen ingresando las personas que están presenciales aquí y afinando los últimos detalles. ¿Alguien quiere plantear alguna cuestión antes de empezar, así como muy urgente?
Nós também estamos aguardando as pessoas chegarem, que acabou de cair uma chuva, então elas estão
Bendición.
atrasando um pouco.
Sí, así es así. Bien. Entonces estamos bien de tiempo. Muchas gracias. Ahora en unos minutos ya nos volvemos a conectar.
Tá.
Los que habéis llegado ahora, lo hemos comentado antes, pero al final de la Masterclass hay un tiempo para poder realizar alguna pregunta y la dinámica un poco por logística es que a medida que vayáis escuchando, si os surge alguna cuestión, la podéis apuntar en papel, la iremos recuperando, las agrupamos.
brought us here. The truth is that it's a big step for us, and we are going to talk about it, the whole journey, in a minute.
It's okay not to do. It's not okay. It's too tight.
It doesn't sit. Is that right?
They should be the same that we have now. They're different from those.
It's not.
Pero no tiene, ella necesita auriculares para entender la traducción. Y vos fue para allá. Sí, trae un device. This is only mic and you will need a device.
I don't like mics. I have to hold it all the time. So
No, this one is the mic.
Oh, this one is in my, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the mic.
Yeah, I know. It's supposed to work.
I see.
Like that.
A ver si tenemos.
Like that. Yeah.
Ahí viene el muchacho. ¿Sí? ¿Quedó?
And va a tener un device de los oídos.
Switch on. No.
Hay que poner on. Ahí.
Okay, do it. I need a clicker. Where-
Necesita el clicker. ¿Se lo traes?
Was that already the introduction?
No.
¿Todavía la
Device.
escucho?
Sí, pero necesita un traductor, algo para entender el idioma. Un device de los oídos.
Creo que ahí.
Este. Clicker for the device, yeah, and this one.
It's okay for you.
Right. I don't know where.
que, bueno, agradecemos este espacio, damos las gracias por recibirnos en este precioso lugar. Muchas caras conocidas con las que venimos transitando este camino. Hoy es tiempo de dar gracias y de construir hacia adelante. Entonces, hay una cosa que siempre repito y es, cuando bebas agua, agradece la fuente. Y eso tiene que ver con algunas de mis maestras. Allá está Rosario Trabal, así que Rosario Trabal, muchas gracias por esto de pensar en lo sistémico, de pensar en lo sentido. Allá está Andrés Lalane, del Centro Latinoamericano de Economía Humana. Andrés fue de los primeros en acoger a Teoría U. Entonces, allí está Liz y allí está Laura Pastorini. Para mí es un orgullo, un honor enorme contar con ambas y que sean ustedes las que den inicio a esta ceremonia, a esta preciosa ceremonia. Creo que lo que se viene es tener la posibilidad de acercarnos a estas teorías del cambio, pero desde el sentir. Muchas y muchos de acá son alumnos del posgrado de transformación organizacional y siempre insistimos en esto de transformarnos con el otro, de transformar esas realidades con las que convivimos de la forma más sentida y más agradecida hacia esas intervenciones que estamos haciendo. Así que mil gracias, bienvenido Otto, muchísimas gracias por estar acá y vamos a estar ahora. Le doy la bienvenida a Laura, una de las grandes almas que van por el mundo recogiendo de estos conocimientos que después podemos aterrizar en casa y podemos transformar las realidades. Así que muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Dani. Acá estoy entre dos intraemprendedoras. Un placer encontrarles aquí. La verdad que es un honor estar en esta casa y ser invitados, invitades de la Universidad de la República en el Uruguay. Y no estamos solo nosotros aquí en esta sala, sino que tenemos el acompañamiento de un montón de otras universidades, como verán allí. Y decía que estaba entre dos intraemprendedoras porque muchas veces se necesitan esas personas, esos contactos dentro de las organizaciones para comenzar con las transformaciones. Algo que parece enorme siempre comienza pequeño. Y tanto Liz como Dani han sido las impulsoras desde dentro de muchos cambios y de traer las semillas de este trabajo. Y yo soy Laura Pastorini, a mí me toca hacer un poco puente de las iniciativas del Presencing Institute en Latinoamérica. Venimos corriendo con Otto, que lo sacamos de Colonia y lo trajimos para aquí, de un evento con 180 líderes de toda Latinoamérica, líderes indígenas territoriales, CEOs de compañía, filántropos, políticos. La verdad que ha sido un evento muy movilizante, venimos todos de ahí. Y decíamos, no podemos, le vamos a pedir a Otto que antes de irse nos deje su regalo, nos comparta su saber y su experiencia. Y como siempre también queremos esta idea de que no nos basta siempre queremos compartir un poco más. Quisimos aprovechar esta instancia como una oportunidad de también sentar las bases para una red de universidades que trabajan con estas metodologías, que ya están conectadas vía Zoom, y que entonces van a estar participando de forma híbrida. Podrán ver ahí que hay otras universidades que tienen distintas cantidades de personas, ¿sí? Hay algunos que son grupitos chiquitos, hay grupos que son enormes. Sabemos que hay gente viajando dentro de Brasil para ir a la universidad, cambiando de ciudad para atender el día de hoy. Entonces, nos encantaría tener este contacto con las universidades. Creo que sería más limpio si el host del Zoom pone en la función ocultar participantes sin vídeo, como habíamos quedado. Eso, va a quedar mucho más limpia la pantalla y vamos a ver quiénes están allí. Bien. Entonces nos gustaría, quizás antes de empezar, podíamos ver la pantallita de nuevo con las universidades. Eso. Y vamos a ver, tenemos las universidades acá, y entonces si podemos ampliar la pantalla para verles. Eso, ya la veo a Pilar en Chile, allá. Las Pilares. Entonces tenemos la Universidad de las Américas de Chile, con Pilar, que es parte de nuestra comunidad desde siempre. Lindo verte, Pilar, ahí. La Universidad Metropolitana, a través del Lab Ícola de Venezuela, con María Antonieta. Saluden, pueden saludar. Aquí Uruguay les saluda. Tenemos el FIAP de Brasil. El FIAP de Brasil. Saluda, FIAP de Brasil. Eso. Tenemos el FIA, nosotros decíamos FIA, FIAP, pero tenemos el FIA, tenemos el FIAP de Brasil, ahí está el FIA saludando. Tenemos, ¿qué más? La Universidad Cantabria en España. Y les tenemos que hacer, ellos realmente se van a quedar hasta muy tarde hoy, van a trasnochar con nosotros. Así que muy especial el saludo. Y tenemos también la Universidad del Desarrollo de Chile, que está por allí. Y hoy es un día muy especial en Chile, se cumple fecha del golpe de Estado, entonces muchas de las universidades de Chile van a reconectarse mañana. Nuestro también sentido homenaje y presencia en este día especial para ustedes. Entonces las universidades, las casas de estudio no están abiertas, pero ellos quisieron conectarse igual y mañana van a ponerse al día. Saben que tenemos esta Masterclass y que después tenemos un taller en el Salón Contiguo, sobre todo para todos los que quieran participar, pero también para los que quieran sobre todo tener créditos universitarios. Entonces tenemos también desde el Uruguay a los centros regionales, tenemos el CURE. Este es el norte, el CURE del norte. Qué bien, estos son centros regionales del país, Otto, que también están conectados. Tenemos, ¿quién más? El noroeste, el litoral norte. Y el centro de UTEC. UTEC es una gran colaboradora de todos estos eventos que ha sostenido la presencia de Otto en Uruguay. Estamos con mucha, allá está el UTEC, inconfundible el logo. Saluden, UTEC. Allá saludan. Entonces, nada, contarles que estamos en esta enorme red de conexión y estamos tratando de construir una nueva forma de ser aliados, aliadas en este momento que nos demanda nuestra historia y en este continente. ¿Cuáles son esas nuevas formas de estar conectados, juntas, juntos, en red, ¿no? ¿Cómo podemos colaborar y qué podemos co-crear en conjunto? Ese es mucho el espíritu de esto, además de, por supuesto, ver y escuchar a Otto. Gracias.
Gracias, te paso, Laura. Bueno, gracias, Laura. La verdad que realmente yo no tengo palabras para agradecer para nosotros, porque en realidad atrás de estas personas que estamos viendo hay un grupo bastante grande de colaboradores que hacen posible el día de hoy. Teoría U llega a Uruguay en el 2015 y allí empezamos en la Facultad de Ciencias Económicas a hacer las primeras traducciones en vivo al español. Muchos de los que están acá participaron desde el 2015. Entonces, tanto en el CLAE, como que está por ahí Andrés Lalane, como en la Facultad de Ciencias Económicas siempre estuvo esta necesidad, porque creo que más que nada es una necesidad de entender qué era esto de la teoría U. Y bueno, Laura fue un puente clave, ¿no?, en todo este proceso. Y bueno, yo en un breve currículum de Otto, Otto es profesor titular en la Sloan School of Management del MIT, es cofundador del Presidency Institute y preside el programa Ideas del Global Change para la innovación. Otto ha escrito el libro de Teoría U como resultado de su tesis doctoral y sin duda que ha ido enriqueciéndose con todas las experiencias que se van acumulando con el tiempo. En el 2015 se inician esos cursos masivos en la plataforma edX abiertos, eran cursos masivos y realmente tuvo una cobertura impresionante, más de 180 países conectados por la plataforma edX. Y era un placer realmente cuando uno sentía esa conexión, porque también lo que nos dimos cuenta, y además luego de la pandemia se nos confirma que el estar conectados, la energía que se genera y la conexión que se genera, incluso ahora con estos compañeros que están aquí conectados, la energía también se genera, ¿sí? Entonces realmente es muy fuerte este movimiento. Otto habla ahora de movimiento, porque lo que realmente se está generando es un fuerte movimiento de personas que estamos de alguna manera conectados con esta teoría. Y, en Colonia lo que se hizo fue una inauguración de la U School en Latinoamérica, U School for Transformation, también que se crean en el ámbito del Presence Institute. Y realmente esto fue un honor participar en ese curso, que era un curso de liderazgo sistémico, porque creo que para darle la palabra a Otto ahora, creo que teoría U, la clave es experimentarla, ¿sí? A veces la aproximación por el libro no es suficiente, hay que experimentarla. Y por eso nosotros también, una parte que es la conferencia de Otto, luego vamos a generar un espacio para preguntas, ¿sí? Y vamos a estar aquí en esta sala hasta las 6. Y después vamos a hacer un corte de media hora y vamos a hacer la experiencia al menos de una de las herramientas que es muy importante. Los que se queden a hacer el taller lo vamos a hacer en la sala de al lado, ¿sí? Pero lo que quería comentar era eso, que es muy importante el experimentar las herramientas para realmente sentir qué es esto, ¿sí? Y qué es este movimiento que se genera con Teoría U. Así que bueno, le doy la bienvenida a Otto y vamos a ver si ponemos la presentación. Adelante, Otto, gracias.
No, no está amplificado. Quiero primero pedir disculpas por el atraso y agradecer a Laura por su presentación, por crear este espacio y decirles y saludar a todos los que están aquí y también a aquellos que se están uniendo online desde Chile, desde Uruguay, desde Brasil, desde Venezuela, incluso desde España. Entonces, es realmente un privilegio para mí compartir algo de mi experiencia. Yo crecí siendo el hijo de dos granjeros en el norte de Alemania, que hace 65 años tenían ideas muy locas para cambiar completamente la manera en que ellos manejaban la granja, los métodos de agricultura orgánica y regenerativa. Entonces, de Uruguay para cómo hacer de la energía regenerativa algo importante. Pero muchos otros países, como ustedes saben, también están siguiendo ese camino. Y el
root causes. And as many people would probably agree on, a lot of them have to do with the way we organize our economy, right? So that I took that as a focus area and wrote my PhD in economics essentially about kind of the title of that is maybe kind of, I just, for your entertainment, right? I translate the title to you. Reflexive modernization of capitalism as revolution from within. So it's kind of a evolution or revolution of our economic structure by bringing in reflexivity, kind of the deeper kind of self-reflection, right, as a key design principle, and revolution from within, right, kind of shifting the inner place from that we operate. Now, so no one ever read that, let alone kind of understood what I realized, but you know, I found what I realized at the end of that is, okay, I could talk a big deal about all these things, right? These changes that maybe if implemented and so on. Was I really useful to anyone who was trying to do that, who was actually pioneering that in the field? And the sobering answer is not a lot, or not at all, one of those two. So that insight really was what brought me to MIT, because when I wanted to join, when I joined then with the MIT Learning Center that back then was headed by Peter Senge, was a research, an action research context, right? Where you explore new topics, not just by studying them, but by running radical experiments yourself, right? By participating in experimentation, learning by doing and discovering by doing. And that's what I wanted to learn, because I thought kind of that's how I could, if I learned that, I could become more useful to the real change makers in society. And so I went for a postdoc to MIT, and then I got stuck there. So that's kind of my, so I'm still there, right? I'm talking about change. But did I ever move on from there? Not really. So, so that's kind of my story in a nutshell. And when you now say, okay, back then, 25 years ago, what was organizational learning that grew out of the systems thinking group at MIT? What, you know, in a nutshell, what really has changed, right? So what is it that that we did, right, with evolving that field in the past 25 years? And I would today summarize that with two words: broadening and deepening. So what back then was organizational learning, broadening means today we know that, I mean, talk to any leader in any organization, right? Most of the real challenges you face, you cannot address alone, right? You cannot address just by your organization. You need to involve a whole bunch of other stakeholders. Often it's cross-sector. And how to do that, how to involve all the other players that need to be engaged in order to change the system. That's, that requires more like a whole system approach. And then the deepening part is that most people, also most leaders, when you talk to them today, would agree that the kind of challenges we face right now that are coming our way, we already face today, but we'll face more so tomorrow. On the one hand, and when I look at the toolkit, the equipment of traditional change management, everything I learned at school, those two things don't fit together, right? So the traditional toolkit I got for change management is actually totally inadequate to addressing the disruptive systemic changes and the poly crisis we are increasingly experiencing. So that's, deepening means we need to connect to a deeper place of change. To really change the system, I believe, you need to shift consciousness. Okay, I get many blank stares. So let me rephrase the same thing. To really need a system, you need to change the mindset of the people who are enacting that system. Okay? Because if you don't, the same people in a new structure will just reenact the same problems. So, and the deepening has to do how to address this deeper level of change, the source level of change. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit. So when you, all right, this is not yet really, okay. A little delay. So that's kind of systems thinking applied right here, right? Delayed feedback. So this is when we look at the situation that many people experience today, definitely leaders, I already talked about that, but also in a recent study, the citizens of the G20 countries. So G20 countries is 60% of the world population and 80% of the world GDP. Basically, all our environmental problems, originating in these 20 countries, most of them. And the citizens and the G20 countries, 3 out of 4, 74%, support transformational change in their economic and social system to better address climate change and inequality. 3 out of 4. So there's everyone knows transformative change is necessary, but usually where the gap is, okay, and how do we do that? And so that's, I would say, a deeply felt sense across the planet today. So, and it's visualized here. So here we have current reality on one end of the spectrum, right? We know a lot about this. On this side, we have the emerging future. We know less about that, right? So it's kind of already kind of getting more thin, we have some assumptions maybe. But what we know least about is the journey from here to there. Disruption essentially means the future is going to be different. And the question that I have been trying to explore is if it's true that, we know not much about the future in reality, but we know one thing: disruption is going to stay. And that's pretty much the only thing we can agree on. And if that's true, that's already out of our control in many ways. Not fully, but in many ways. What is it we can control? How we respond to disruption. Whether we respond from a place of reactiveness and reenacting old patterns, or whether we respond from a place grounded in our deeper intentions. And the viewpoint that Theory U and presencing takes on this problem, which I think is the #1 leadership problem today, is the following. What it takes is a journey. A journey that is both an outer journey, but also an inner journey. An inner journey towards accessing our deeper sources of knowing. And that's kind of where, when we, refine our method in doing so, we can access the source of the emerging future already in the now, in the experience we are having now. So that's, the theme that I'm going to unpack a little bit. You have seen this iceberg model many times, depicting systems thinking. So when we look at the world today from systems thinking point of view, what do we see? We collectively create results that almost no one wants. We run a global economy that is using 1.75 planets. We use resources 1.7 times the regeneration capacity of planet Earth. Inequality, right? The richest 10 men, they're all men. And during the first 2 years of COVID, more than doubled their net worth from 700 billion to 1.5 trillion. Okay, so you remember, right? We are unable since 2015 to deliver the 100 billion, the meager 100 billion to climate mitigation. That was agreed on by the Paris Agreement, right? So we can't do that. But what we can do is a net transfer of wealth from the middle class and the poor to the super rich. That's 800 billion. The 800 billion we can do, the 100 billion to the survival really of communities in the planet, we can't find that. So that's, it has to do with how we organize our economy. That's really why I entered that field. 60%, right? Environmental issues, social issues, we know all about that. I think what is really irritating me to some degree most is this one. This is a recent number from the CDC in the US. 60% of teenage girls in US high schools report about persistent hopelessness and symptoms of depression. Now, I have been in different places, really in a number of, in discussion with educators in many other world regions. And I say, well, so this is extreme, but what does it look like in your case? And almost everyone says, we have exactly the same issue, right? Not that we know the exact numbers, but that's exactly the issue we have too. So spiritual divide is really all the barriers that move between accessing my own deeper sources of who I could be tomorrow. right? Not just who I am today, but who I could be tomorrow. And that's probably the one. I understand that, right? And that's totally solvable. We all know that, right? So it's kind of, we know how to get there. In principle, we also know how to do this, right? Yes, we don't have, political majority for that, but that's kind of pretty clear how to do that. This one personally is irritating me most as an educator. What does systems thinking do? Asking the question why. And, leadership from a systems view is something very simple. It's not enough to react against the symptoms at the top. What you need to do is understand and address the deeper root issues. These three terms, structures, paradigms of thought, and the deeper sources, basically in a nutshell, depict the evolution of systems thinking. So in my view, and Peter Senge's view, these four levels, right? State-of-the-art systems thinking really includes all these levels, not just one of them or two of them. And that's kind of all these four levels together is something that we call awareness-based systems change. And it's based on these principles that in part I already covered just very quickly. You cannot understand a system unless you change it. So that was the point when I went to MIT, because I realized the knowledge I was creating was not particularly helpful. So we need to get involved in real transformation and regeneration initiatives in society. Secondly, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. We already talked about that. And unless you transform the mindsets. It's basically saying unless you involve all four of these levels. Now, the real question is how? How do you do that? And this number two is really summarizing my past 25 years of experience in participating in projects and so on and so forth as an action researcher in less than 10 words. It's a sobering summary. So how? Here's what we learned. You cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see, sense, and invert itself. Let me unpack that. See itself, we all know, we all get, right? That's all systems thinking, yeah? Holding up the mirror, you map a system, right? And then, you look at that, you reflect, and so on. You can't change your behavior unless kind of you look into the mirror. So that's something that's quite familiar to us. What we learned then, unless you see and sense, the sensing part is important, because what we learned is just seeing what's broken with the system, right? So I have the knowledge what's broken with you. That's not very helpful, right? It may be appropriate or not, but it's not transformative. If you want to transform a system, if you really want to unlock collective creativity in a system, you need to move the knowing from here to here. And that's why you need to use methods of embodied knowing. Because if I say, as a privileged person, do not feel what it feels like on the other side of any of these divides, I'm very unlikely to do something about my privilege, right? To do something to engage in that situation in a way that could be transformative, that could make a difference. So that's something we learned. And, the problem we today have is, of course, the knowing doing gap, right? We know everything about what's broken and so on. But we in principle know what the solutions are, but we are not enacting them collectively. So that's the sensing. And we'll get back to that later. And so inverting, what does inversion mean? It basically means the inner and the outer. Unless I realize that to create change out there, I need to shift something in here, because only that will shift our quality of relationship. And a lot of that boils down to something really simple: deep listening, right? Not just as individuals, but also collective spaces. So we need to open up and stretch a little bit kind of our own heart to make more room there, right? For really all the perspectives in the system, because otherwise those, so that's the inversion. It's the inner and the outer. Lastly, you cannot lead transformative systems change unless you sense and presence the emerging future. So what I'm basically saying is, and that's, I don't know what your experience is, you know, when you have created new things, you were part of processes where something new came into the world. But in my experience, and also cases that I studied, really all boil down to the same thing, which is, how does the future first show up in the human system? Here. So it's a sense, right? It's a vague sense of a possibility that every entrepreneur, every creative person knows that, right? You feel something. You can't fully put that into language or words or frameworks yet, but so it's a feeling. And then you identify that feeling and you follow that. You explore that by doing stuff, and then kind of by putting words and frames and so on around that. So that's the basically what I'm saying here is leadership in my view, right? If you double click on the word root of the English word leadership and also the Spanish word leadership, it goes down to an Indo-European word root that literally means this: leadership, light. It's kind of late is the old Indo-European word root, and it literally meant this. Leadership means stepping forth. Stepping forth from one world that we know very well, right? So left side of the divide, I started the visuals with, to another world that we don't know very well, and that is only coming into being if we have the courage to put, you know, to take that step into the unknown. And that can be a very lonely process. That's actually what it feels like to many leaders when you really talk to them. And that's also what we feel. I believe it's also the collective situation that we face. So we are called on leadership from a systems view is the capacity of a system to sense and step into the future. I could also say the capacity of a system to sense and co-create the future. So that's what leadership is. So it's not extending the past, but it's the capacity when you face disruption, it's the capacity to move forward, to sense that possibility, and then to take the first step into that, beginning to stepping into that. All right. Those are basically the foundations, right? So that's awareness-based systems change and awareness-based systems leadership, if you want. Now, what really boils this, what this boils down to is essentially a deeper view of leadership, right? In leadership research, we know a lot about what successful leaders do, a lot about how they do it, processes they use, but we know very little about the deeper sources from which the inner places from which they operate. And yet, when I talked with a number of the change makers who really kind of brought new things into reality, I heard, a deeper aspect of leadership described in many ways. And one of them put this deeper dimension of leadership in this terminology. The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. The success, so let me translate. The success of what I do as a change maker or as a leader depends on the inner place from that I operate. Not on the what, not on the how, on the inner place. The quality of my presence, the quality of my listening, the quality of my attention, whether I'm fully there or elsewhere in my mind. So it's that dimension. The quality of the intention that I bring into a situation. I heard that echoed by many other leaders, including one of the greatest leaders on the planet right now, Christiana Figueres, as the architect and driving force behind the Paris Agreement, which was an amazing accomplishment. And so essentially, when you face disruption, there's a lot you don't control in your environment. So what is it as a change maker, as a leader, that you can control? It's your own self. It's the inner place from that you operate. So it was really those kinds of conversations that opened my eyes to that deeper level, right? The inner place. But I had no idea how to map that deeper territory. And today I would map it in these with these three capacities: the open mind, the open heart, the open will, aka curiosity, compassion, and courage. And what it basically does is this: it's moving us beyond the habit of downloading our thoughts, downloading our emotions, downloading habitual action, right? And it's doing so by helping us to suspend old habits of judgment, basically seeing with fresh eyes. That's the open mind. What's open heart? Open heart is essentially, in an organizational context that most of us are in, it's something very simple. Look at a problem, not just from your angle, your own side of view, but from the viewpoint of the people you are talking to, right? Your stakeholders, kind of the people you are interacting with. So can you put yourself into the shoes of another, right? That's kind of the redirection or the empathizing here. Open heart. And open will is letting go and letting come. So, by the way, I became aware of these three gateways, right? These three inner gestures, inner activities we can perform. Suspension. So, and this was originally called redirection, right? Kind of looking from other, and letting go by Francesco Varela, the Chilean cognitive scientist who really who claimed that we have a blind spot in Western science, and particularly a blind spot in Western cognition science. And the blind spot is not that we don't know enough about the brain, but we don't know enough about how experience is coming into reality. And then he researched that question, right? Phenomenology and meditation and psychological introspection, other methodologies. And he synthesized that with these three terms: suspension, right? Really stopping. It really means stopping, right? And attending in a new way, redirection or empathizing and letting go. I would say today in the world, right, strengthening these capacities, that's the key. That's our work. Our work as educators, our work as leaders, our work as change makers. That's kind of our workbench. We all are, working one way or another. All right, what is it that's really happening? You know that well, right? Pretty much the opposite of everything I've been talking about the past half hour. It's not the opening of the mind, heart, will. It's actually a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, and will. AKA amplification of ignorance, hate, and fear. Now, rather than seeing and sensing, which is really seeing with our heart, what do we see, right? Denial, right? Think about the whole denial industry. At least in the US, we have it. Desensing, right? Think about all the filter bubbles, right? The social networks put us in. So, I mean, there's a billion-dollar industry, right? That is making money by maximizing user engagement through activating exactly this: hate, anger, and fear. That's the reality. It works. It's a billion-dollar business. Actually, $1 trillion business when you look at the industry. It also ruins democracy and creates the 60% and some other things. But it's a force, right? It's there. So a leader today, any kind of change maker, is dealing with what? Both of these realities. They are both real. We need to engage with both of them. So what I'm essentially saying is something very simple. If you face disruption, which is pretty much the only thing we know is going to stay for sure, then you have a choice how to respond. You can respond by doing this, turning away, or make America great again, right? The most important word is the last one, again. So you're turning back to something that no longer is and close down, right? You go into a freeze reaction. Or you respond by turning toward and opening up. So when you turn away, you activate one kind of cycle, right? That by now we all know very well. And when you turn toward, you activate another kind of cycle and process that by now, and based on our experiences, we also know very well. When you now step back and say, okay, wait a minute, what's really the difference between those things? When you look at that from a more analytical view, I would say the difference is this. This one is really built on an architecture of disconnection, right? Building up the walls, kind of increasing the thickness of the bubbles, getting stuck inside the bubble. And it leads to architectures of destruction that we can watch. Remember the 1.75, 2.0, 60% of the planet, of basically societies falling apart. That's really what's happening in the US, right? So losing pieces, losing their capacity to connect with each other and of our own self, right? So that's kind of the, while when you look at the pattern here is architectures of connection. You connect across boundaries more deeply And you give rise, right? The other side of the U here is really all about co-creation. You give rise for something new to emerge. But then again, the question is this. All right, so that's kind of a distinction, right? You can make that distinction, but what is the independent variable? So what does it depend on whether I activate, or in a situation, we end up activating this pattern or that pattern? And what I would say, the number one independent variable there is awareness. And here I want to introduce a distinction between ecosystem awareness and ecosystem awareness. What I mean with ecosystem awareness is something very technical. It's an awareness that is originating from inside its own boundaries. So when you think about a system, right, a system, there's a boundary between what's inside the system, outside. Ecosystem awareness is when the awareness you have, right, is originating only from inside the boundaries of that system. So you're stuck inside that bubble. While ecosystem awareness is an awareness that is originating from transcending these boundaries. How? Opening the mind, opening the heart, opening the will. That's why that stuff matters. And that's why I'm saying real systems change today. Yeah, we can tinker with structure and so on. We also need to do stuff there. But what we really need to do is to shift this structure of consciousness in this direction, or to offer environments where that choice can be taken individually and also collectively, because it's a choice that we have. It's not something that's imposed on us by natural laws. Essentially, I could stop here. I don't have, the rest really is about examples. But that's a lens. And maybe we can pause for a little moment here, and you can think about, okay, where do I, in my own real experience, my own lived experience, where do I see this going on, right? Either in my country or in my organization or in my context. Where have I experienced these patterns here? Where do you see them? So that's the first part of Theory U, which is basically, it's a framework, it's a lens. How you look at reality, and what this lens does is, it not only looks at the what and the how, but it brings in another variable, and that's the inner place on that we operate. And what I'm saying is, we have a choice. And it's not by natural laws determined that we always have to be here or here. No, it's our choice. And the way you create space for that choice is you create environments that allow system to see sense, and if they choose to do so, change themselves. All right, so essentially, what I'm saying is, it's this stuff what matters, right? We need to strengthen this capacity because, yeah, we do that with who? With the people I love, right? My friends. That's not good enough. When we really, there's a lack of trust in society. That's really holding us back. We have high trust, including here in Latin America, in very small groups, right? Family plus very close friends. And when we move more outside, the trust level drops very significantly, even starting at the workplace. And it's a lack of this capacity, right? To do anything about that, which is really the foundation for development and increasing well-being, we need to increase these capacities. Where does it start? Here. In higher ed, and of course, in all institutions of education. That's why I'm grateful speaking here and kind of being in conversation. So, all right, what does that practically look like? Practically, so when you apply that to a process, we usually take a framework of these 5 movements: co-initiating, kind of bringing people together, clarifying what it really is we want to do. Co-sensing is really much more, moving into walking in the shoes of others, particularly the most remote stakeholders. The presencing kind of is really about spaces of stillness, right? Of deeper reflection, where you not only make sense about everything we learned in these, explorations and looking at the system from the various angles, but also try to connect the deeper sources of knowing in that specific system in terms of who we are and who we want to be. And then out of this kind of deeper reflection, kind of those kind of prototyping, small level experiment, which then you integrate into solutions, which then often kind of allow you to connect, which then in the co-evolution kind of are informing the evolution and the transformation of the system. So when you, I don't have the time here really to go much into details, but really want to more talk about the structural levels. What do you see here, right? And that's true for any kind of multi-stakeholder process, lots of people, right? From the health ministry and kind of all the other stakeholders and so on. What do you see here? Lots of people. What's the difference? What changed? Yes.
For me to translate the question to you, Otto, he or she needs to use a microphone. They're not using a microphone, Otto, so I can't translate the question to you.
Sí, ¿se entendió lo que comentó Melina? Hay alguien que está escuchando sin los auriculares puestos y eso se escucha, ¿sí? Está escuchándose. Entonces que por favor lo enchufen bien. Sí, porque está muy alto. Ah, ok. Dice la cabina, querida. Sigamos, sí, es la cabina. Disculpa, Otto. Había un problema de escucha acá, pero ya está resuelto. Ahora no escucha Otto. Sorry.
I didn't have a translation, so.
It's okay now.
All right, okay. So to get to the discussion, right, I just want to end with 2 things. Show you a few examples, what it looks like in different contexts, and then kind of add a little bit kind of what's the essence of all that, right? Kind of across these examples, what I believe is really the future of our leadership and education work, or the direction of that. So what you see here, for example, in this example of healthcare transformation around maternal health, is a shift of the relationships. Yes, the outcomes of maternal health, kind of the maternal mortality kind of dropped as a result after a couple of years, but more significantly, what really happened was a shift of relationship, of communication across all these institutions that needed to work together in order to come into a systemic learning and a systemic transformation and development process. And when you look at that shift, what is really the essence of the mindset shift that you often notice when you take kind of a group of stakeholders through such a process? And it can be visualized like this. So this is like a traditional view of looking at a system, right? Observers here on one side of the telescope, the system is something out there, right? And we all know that as long as you have that kind of mindset, it's very hard to change anything, right? Because basically, who is to blame about all the issues that we face? It's kind of all these other people. And what's really necessary, what real change in organization is really about is this, right? Bending the beam of observation back onto the observing self. And so how do you do that? Well, deep listening, right? So beginning to see yourself through the eyes of the stakeholders, all these things that I mentioned before. But essentially, that's what it boils down to. And kind of the shift from here to here, what do we call that on an individual level? We call that reflection, we call that mindfulness, right? Paying attention to your attention, essentially. And in conversation, when it happens on a team level, what do we call it? It's a shift from debate to dialogue. Debate is my versus your view. Dialogue is not just people talking to each other. It's the capacity of a system to see itself, right? When you have a strategy process in any kind of organization, well, what's the main thing you do? You make the assumptions about the future visible. And when you make them visible, oh, it's just an assumption, right? I need to test print assumptions, right? So there can be more than one, and I need to look at the different scenarios that come out of that and so forth. So essentially, kind of this making systems not only see themselves, but also sense themselves is the core business of systems leadership. So when I work with organizations, with companies, that's what I am getting paid for. From here to here. Why? Because it makes a huge difference. It completely shifts how stakeholders are able to talk with each other, to deal with differences, whether it's just by blaming others or whether it's by moving into a process of thinking together. So what are mechanisms to do that? I would say that's the core business of leadership today, right? Building these kind of environments where that kind of shift can happen, making systems sense and see themselves. This is a company example. One of the biggest fintechs in the world, 700. So this is was shortly before the pandemic. 700 million customers back then, and the top 30 people. What was the issue of the CEO? Well, I have the most brilliant people in my top 30 team, graduates from MIT, Stanford, blah, 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 blah. They do a brilliant job in their individual leadership responsibility, but together as a team, right, our collective IQ is really low. It's a classical problem, right, we have in many organizations. So what can we do? Then ask them, okay, what's the leadership challenge? One of them was globalization, right? That more and more of the business is happening outside China. So then we picked, particularly in Southeast Asia, we picked 2 countries, 15 people. We did a mini dialogue training, so deep listening training, and then essentially, so mapping the entire stakeholder system from the government, the regulators, to their partners in these countries, the customers of the customers, all the way to the unbanked people, right? Those parts of the population with zero access to any kind of financial services. And the job was a journey of listening, right? Don't sell anything, don't explain anything, just put yourself, try to understand reality from their angle. And then they returned. So this is, we met back in Singapore, and then both groups kind of 15 made sense of everything they learned. And that completely shifted the conversation and the way they saw their own. Before it was kind of my department and your department and blah, 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 blah. Suddenly all of that was gone. They really look at themselves from who are we working for, right? And the ecosystem of partners that we are working for, what's the impact on them, what we're here doing or not doing. So complete reframe. That's what a shift to dialogue is. That's what making systems see and sense themselves. So a shift from ego to eco, the simplest way of doing it is listening. To whom? To your ecosystem of partners. Is that the business ecosystem or something else? Now, it sounds so straightforward, right? Well, that didn't, it was basically a 4-day intervention. Yeah, it took a little effort, a little preparation and so on, a little travel. Okay? But, you know, it's not that much really, right? It's pretty straightforward. Does it happen usually? No. It seems so simple. Make systems see sense and then change themselves when you use listening as a gateway. That's another method. Something we call 4D. We also practiced that a few days ago in Colonia. Kind of some of you here were part of that. So it's basically, so this is kind of something in Southeast Asia, one of the biggest multi-stakeholder initiatives there. And this is mostly Indonesia. And you have all the usual stakeholders here, kind of, so that was the core triangle initiative. But then you always have, so that's kind of, you remember the 3 divides: ecological divide, social divide. So how do you bring in the voice of the ecological divide? Through a role called Mother Earth. Okay, so his real job is he's the head of HR and the biggest bank in Indonesia. But his role is Mother Earth. So he brings in that voice. How do you bring in the social divide? Well, that's easy. So take an example of the most marginalized groups, right? Those who are completely excluded by how the current system operates. Farmers, fishermen was it in this case here. And then take the voice of the future, right? Could be children, could be like future generations, whatever, right? So that's kind of the inner divide, really giving the future potential. And as we all know, what's the main problem of all governance today? The 2 missing voices, the voice of the planet and the voice of the future, the voice of future generations. And that's where we are screwing up everything. So you bring these voices in, and you know that's like a 2-hour process with the reflection part and so on. And I use it a lot in my practical work. Why? Because it's fast, it's completely shifting the conversation, and it creates a language to talk about the deeper systemic barriers, right? That often are difficult to talk about because everyone sees that, right? Seeing together as a gateway for real change and for different kinds of conversations. Same process. A month or 2 months ago in Singapore, we don't have time to go into details, but it's interesting. Can you do that in traditional environments? Well, how more traditional does it get than United Nations, right? So very kind of, top-down driven and so on, very siloed, right? More than 30 country organizations in each country that somehow, need to work together to be useful for the country, for the SDGs, but have no incentives to do so because totally siloed reporting. So that the usual. So this is the humanitarian country team. I think it's Ecuador, that not only involves UN, but also NGO and government stakeholders for humanitarian responses, right? Crisis responses. And how do you build that capacity? So yeah, so we have done that in 26 countries, which is about 20% kind of all the respective teams. And so we have done that, across continents and really at scale. And what came out of that is 3 shifts, right? So it's a 4-month process that in part is virtual and part to the degree possible, not during COVID, but afterwards is in person. A mindset shift, right, from a more silo to a more systems view, or ego to eco. A shift in relationships, kind of from and also in identity, kind of from more the we to the we dimension, and then kind of an activation really of action confidence, right? Moving beyond the analysis paralysis and kind of really activating the action confidence that's there. The leader of this initiative that we did over the last 3 years in 26 countries is actually here in the room. I think it's Becky Buell over there, when you want to talk to her later. So interesting experiences, right? To bring these kinds of methods in very traditional contexts, and yet we know kind of there's a lot broken with the UN, but we do need to move into the future an evolution of our governance, particularly a localization, right, of our governance into situations, organized around situations like these teams are facing. Okay, let me run with defining systems change as something very simple. We all know this, our devices. What do we do every now and then? Updating the operating system. What's happening in society? What should be happening? Exactly the same thing, right? We need to update our operating system. And what's the problem? Well, it's not enough, right? Plug in, agree, and then it's done. It's a fight, right? It's a long process. And yet, when I look, I don't know you, but when I look into social changes today, I see an evolution around the same 3 or 4 stages of operating system in almost any sector that I look. 1.0 is the past, kind of, that's basically input and authority centric. 2.0 is the mainstream today, which is outcome and efficiency centric. Think about evidence-based medicine, think about how a lot of the school systems are organized today, right? Which is essentially teaching for testing, which of course, as we know, is the opposite of real learning. So what does a good school do? Moving to 3.0, something I call user-centric, student-centric architectures of learning and processes, or what we see in healthcare, a good healthcare system is what you reorganize that around the patient journey. That's progress? Is that good enough? I don't think so, because the world we move into will require us to yet another shift, something I call regenerative and ecosystem centric. So when in the learning systems, we move more towards head, heart, and hand, more holistic learning environments that capacitate the learner to sense and shape the future. In my view, education not only is about the transfer of knowledge, it is about capacitating the next generation to sense and shape the future. It's kind of this deeper capacity that I've been talking about, and that today is so much more relevant given the world we are moving into. And here, of course, we have a lot of interesting development that move beyond effective ways of addressing symptoms of sickness towards strengthening the sources of well-being and health. And food, industrial, agriculture, the mother of half our environmental problems today. Organic, okay, that's better. right? Reducing the harm we afflict on the earth, on the land. But what's really necessary today is regenerative agriculture in the sense of food as a medium for healing planet and people. Now, so on the business side, I understand kind of some of you are engaged in that. So how do we deal with the sustainability issue, right? Compliance, of course, is level one. Then resource efficiency is really kind of the outcome, that's kind of what many companies already do. But that's progress, but not good enough. And then the next stage is really sustainability as a source for innovation, right? Think about the car business. Right now, I move from combustion engine to electric vehicle, right? That's real progress, it's innovation. You build in kind of sustainability into the innovation process. It's progress, but now I have an EV, I'm still stuck in the same traffic jam, right? So the deeper systems issues with sustainable mobility is still not addressed. And that's, of course, what the 4.0 needed to move to. And what we see here is more the emergence really of a new class of companies, mission-driven enterprises, kind of where the social mission, the impact that you try to have with your business is becoming more central. It's not just a side function, it's moving into the purpose of, it's reshaping the narrative that you have and the identity of who you are and what you're doing in the world. Finance, Wall Street, right? Okay, that's kind of basically externality blind, right? Extractive economy, fueling the extractive economy. ESG, social impact, all these things, all these topics. Everyone talks about it. It's also stuff happening. Is that progress? Yes. Good enough? No. Because often unaddressed, the deeper systems issues. How we address the real root issues, rather than just selective addressing one or two outcome areas here. At the end of the day, governance, right? A lot is about governance. Visible hand, the invisible hand. Okay, so those are two we need. Stakeholder groups. That's the stuff we have today, right? Governance today is composed of those three things. The problem here is some groups organize more easily than others, and some voices are never there. The planet, the future, the marginalized, and so forth. So what we really need is something that I call CASA, collective action from shared awareness. Basically, you don't bring together everyone, but everyone who is a partner in a specific systems issues, let's say in a region or so, and you go through a process that I essentially described to you of making sense together, of looking at the system from all the different angles, and then, from that shared awareness of the whole, you identify leverage points and you explore the future by doing. The university, okay. I could talk about it historically. I spare that, so I don't want to put everyone to sleep. But 1.0 is one-to-many, right? A lot of the online, I mean, I do stuff online myself. We do it. But what is online? It's great because the reach. It's bad because of one-to-many, right? Very old, basically broadcasting stuff. 2.0 is basically, what I described here earlier, kind of. So it's, you offer different means of distribution, but essentially it's kind of organized around the outcomes that reproducing certain bodies of knowledge. Of course, that's not real and deep learning. It's a kind of one we need. And then 3.0, I think kind of so often in a good higher ed institutions, you have the small group work and you engage You can, so that's what we, in ULab, I know some of you, that's what we try in ULab, right? To give them really possibility to engage with the material more and from the viewpoint that everyone brings. 4.0 is, I don't know. I mean, that would be an interesting discussion to have. I basically want to ask that as a question, but I have a hunch, and the hunch comes from here, which is it has to be regenerative and transformative in terms of the systems that we are engaging with. So in other words, and I think it has to do something, so the breathing, the ecosystem breathing means it needs to evolve. That's what I'm noticing, right? Yes, we do stuff here, and then we go out into the world. We do stuff there. Then we return back here. So there's kind of this breathing of coming together here, reflecting, making sense, upgrading your toolkits, supporting each other, coaching, and then we go back, right? And engage at the front line of where regeneration and transformation in society happens today. So that's my my hunch. That's what we try to do with ULab and these kind of. That's what we. So that there is a process that. Now, regeneration, what does that mean? It's very personal, right? What is most systemic is most personal. So we need kind of new environments where we really not only understand, but participate in the, so you cannot think about transformation in a deep way without really participating in it, right? But how do you then create environments for that? And that is partly on campus, partly is then connecting to the hubs of, pioneering new activities, right, in your community or in others. So that's so that's kind of what I see going on here. But essentially, let's step back, right, and say, okay, what does this say? It says all of this says something very simple. We live in a world where we have 4.0 challenges. And what do we watch? What do we see in society? Responses that are limited by 1.0, 2.0, sometimes 3.0. That's the problem. But more of the same is not going to cut it. We all know that. So what's missing is environments and where we can practice and see kind of these kinds. And so while we have a lot of separation between the sectors on level 1 and 2, on level 4, they are highly interwoven, highly integrated. So that's basically what we are missing in society is learning infrastructure for this stuff here, which is in part personal and where the new is starting always small, right? It starts with these capacities, right? The future, that's what Teoría U believes. The future is already here. Where is it? In my heart. In your heart. And in our relationships. And that's what we need to pay attention to. Well, it's very hard to do that in such a big group, right? That's why we need to organize in smaller groups, right? To have more personal connections with each other. But for that, you need to create the environment. So that's, I think that those are kind of the new learning environments that I see beginning to happen around many edges, and where we have in society a real lack of that. And so when you just step back, so what do we have higher ed for in society, right? Why are we funding all this, right? For creating these learning infrastructures. I mean, that would be the most straightforward response. If it's not happening, so if we will find out that it's just not happening, right? Higher ed is frozen into these other levels. Well, then we need to make it happen elsewhere. But that would be the most obvious response. And of course, it does take many sides, right? From faculty, from students. Often students are key innovators there, and from administration and so forth. All right. What I tried to say in the last hour or so is all of these things here, right? Which is planetary healing and civilizational regeneration. So to be successful, which 3 out of 4 people feel we need to have, right? It's not a minority any longer. In order to make this happen, there's only one way of doing it: by shifting the qualities of relationship. That's the only way. And the only way, that's what we learned in 70 years of change management or something, the only way to do this is by creating new supporting infrastructures. Now, I call them here Youth Group for Transformation because we try to prototype them there. But you can just, erase that and just translate that as new learning infrastructures. New learning and leadership infrastructures, support structures for transformation. What do? They democratize access to transformation literacy. They democratize access to the methods and tools for building these new these support structures for transformation, right? On the journey, helping us to more effectively co-sense, connect with our inner knowing, and then beginning to co-create from there. And they help us to upgrade the operating system. Because the problem we have is not just individual action, it is collective action. And for that, we need to upgrade the operating system. So that's what we have been prototyping. And so let me just skip over here. What these spaces, right, that we try to create do is basically strengthening this stuff here. And what was so inspiring to me is, let me just skip over all this, so this was in Southeast Asia a few months ago in Bali. Oops. Oh, I thought there was a new slide somewhere. Sorry, let me just try it. I was told, which is just from today. That's what I wanted to show. Oh. So maybe someone can fix that. It's kind of the picture.
Hay un slide nuevo que pasamos hace un ratito.
Right at the very end. I wanted to end with that because shots taken today and yesterday, and a number. So we were the past 2 days. We have been trying to experiment. So as this comes back up, maybe so there were like 150, 160 of us the last 3-4 days to experiment with these learning environments. Maybe just raise your hand if you were part of that. Raise your hand because then you also see the person where these people are. You can connect with them, and it was actually. So 165 people from 17 countries, all the sectors, a very, very diverse group. And what inspired me over these days is to see that what's holding, at least studies by UNDP and others that have shown that, what's holding development often back is the lack of trust. Now, a profound shift in relationships can actually happen in a very short amount of time, even though the group that you bring together has an enormous diversity. So I think that's it. All right. So this is the group. We had some from the Mayan and Inca traditions, elders who were participating in the process and gifting us kind of with some of the healing spaces that and rituals that they offered. You see here a case. We had a case from Colombia. And it was youth leaders, right? So youth kind of the most underrepresented group in institutional decision-making today in very marginalized communities. And so here, so women of colors in rural areas, so you use basically all the device against you, and the violence, the structural, cultural, and direct violence they're experiencing. And then, you know, so this systems mapping works like you map current reality and get all the voices in first, and then you allow that reality to evolve, but not by what you think the solution is. So it's not a solution. It's like accessing the gold mine of information that we have already in our current experience, right? Where does this, you know, relationship, this situation is wanting to go? So it was, again, I can't do any justice that, and I'm also noticing that now I'm stopping. All I want to say is, it was a process that, of course, I knew about the issues, right? Exclusion, all these things, and so on. I knew also about the group, kind of but what it really did is opening up my mind to a more complete understanding, including kind of the armed groups in that situation. And what in particular did is opening my heart. There was almost no one. I mean, there were many of us who could not cry. Why? Because you experience reality from a different angle. It's the angle that we are blocking out of our habitual ways of sense making. And what a process like this does is that you look at all the different angles from all the different stakeholders together in a community. And it's this shared seeing that, in my experience, is one of the most important gateways to creating the foundation for shared action and shared creativity later. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Otto. Era emocionante recordar estos momentos, sobre todo en un país que sufrió un genocidio y que a veces decimos no tenemos raíces in.
I think it's very moving to recall these moments, particularly in a country with such conflicts. We ourselves are the grandchildren of migrants and colonizers. We had the chance to connect in a different way with knowledge from our continent. So the idea now is to proceed to questions. Liz is going to facilitate the questions and answers. In theory, what we say is what is on the left side of the U has to do with observing, listening, accessing information, sensing. We have just heard a lot of things, some of which moved us, others shocked us, and others had forced us to have another vision and transformed us. But before going onwards to action, what we're going to do is let this settle for a bit. We're going to try to feel now, at this moment, our body, our emotions, our sensations, our thoughts. After everything that I heard, what is the product? What is the result once it's gone through the colander? What is resonating of the words that I heard, of the sensations I had, and the images I saw? So that we don't jump reactively to the question, and the question comes from that place. The question that we want to ask, the question that wants to come through me. And there in our papers or our notebooks, we take note of a few questions or of a question, and Liz is going to guide you through the process because we have all the other universities as well. Thank you, Laura, for this moment of connection with the moment. We have a few minutes, a very few minutes for questions. So we're going to have 4 questions, more or less. We are going to ask for a question from the room. Then, if you agree, we are going to have a question from the universities. So who has a question? Thank you very much. My name is Pablo from Buenos Aires. And Otto, what I wanted to ask was something that is emerging these days, which is the issue of artificial intelligence. The question would be, I'm trying to connect. From what perspective are you sensing this emerging issue of artificial intelligence? How can you look at it from your personal perspective? From my own perspective, it gives me a lot of fear. And on the other hand, I'm excited about it. But my question refers more to your perspective.
It is one of the biggest questions we face in this century. And capitalism has completely transformed the past few years. As Shoshana Zuboff describes in her book, Surveillance Capitalism. And we see the emergence of a new business model, which is basically not extracting nature, it's not extracting individuals, but it's extracting data, right? It's turning individual experience into analytical data that work beautifully to manipulate the behavior of the collective. And that's why it's $1 trillion industry and business. So, I mean, there are few things that seem to be clear. I mean, one is with ChatGPT and so forth, everything that you can put into an algorithm will be done by So in other words, a lot of what we are teaching will be done by machines much better very soon. Because the only thing we know for sure is the learning of those instruments is just astonishing. It's also impressive, but it's just essentially a mirror of our behavior and thoughts of the past. Like it's, moving that forward. I think what it means for us as educators and human beings is we need to focus a lot more radical into those things what algorithms can't do. Intuition, knowing that is operating, yes, here, and it's grounded here. And essentially everything I was talking about, sensing and presencing and enacting emerging future possibilities. That's the main point, right? About give rise to different patterns rather than just extending the knowledge and the experience of the past. That's that part, the extension, analyzing these patterns and predicting. So they're like amazing, speech predicting machines, right? But it does not allow for, when you meet disruption, the emergence of really new patterns. I think that's why in the future, we all have a lot more radically focusing on those things that these machines can't do, but that make us are exactly the ones that make us human. The 60% I quoted, when I asked, so the educators around the world, so why is it? Yeah, there's a little bit 1.75 into inequality, that's part of it. But the main thing they say is social media. We all know that. We know it from our own families. I mean, hardly there's any family around who isn't somehow affected by that. So yeah, it's a big problem. And it's part of the blind spot that we collectively have. What we never had is a conversation about why, about the legitimacy of grabbing and owning someone else's data and you turning that into analytics that you can use to manipulate behavior of the collective. Now, if you use the definition, and yet it can be a very powerful tool for social development as well. So if you use the definition of systems thinking that I used, which is our systems transformation, which is making systems see, sense themselves so that they then can go through a process of changing themselves. The seeing and sensing, right? Data could be the most beautiful resource for that. But that's exactly not what we do right now, because all the money, so why are they trillion-dollar companies? Because we use the architecture as a one-way mirror, right? Where 30 people here see the picture, what's driving behavior, and can manipulate the algorithms and therefore drive the behavior of billions. It's not a mirror, right? It's a one-way mirror where the 30 see everything and we don't even know what it is. But you could make it into a real mirror, right? That allows systems to see and sense themselves, to see their patterns, right? That the citizens, the community, and you could put that into the service of, of ecosystem leadership, right? Where you activate collective agency and individual agency and so on. It's all there, but we need a different arrangement, right? Who owns what, right? Why, if I leave one network, can I not use my whole network and go to another platform, right? That would make, for some of these trillion-dollar companies, that would shrink it overnight instantly. So it's these contracts. It's kind of, we're having a contract there that was never discussed with anyone. It's a land grab that happened. First by Google, then by Facebook, then by others, and now by everyone. So that's the conversation we need to have. Of course, all we have is trust and monopoly. So we have the tools of the 20th century. We're totally unequipped to have the real conversation we need to have, but it's going to happen. And I think that's the direction of travel. And you're pointing exactly at something that is, yeah, it's one of the biggest one or two problems in this century.
Buenísimo. Bueno, vamos a seguir con una pregunta que viene de Piap, de Brasil.
Now we continue with a question from Brazil, from Piap, which has to do with education. Understanding education as a lever for systemic change, how can we improve the quality of presence in the schoolrooms and the relation between students and teachers? What would be a way to improve that presence and awareness in the schoolrooms?
Oh, that's a great question.
I learned that, you know, a number of us are educators, you know, one way or another. And so what's the biggest tool, the most significant tool we have in this situation? It's our own self. It's our own the presence, how we show up. It's our own quality of listening. And so I would say the way to improve, and at the end of the day, the relationship, the quality of relationship between educator and learner, that's the core axis, if you want, right? That's a key axis. It's of course also learner to learner, when you learn from each other, right? But it is kind of the quality of that relationship, which really is the most important vehicle, right? Is that just on transmitting content, or does that access deeper level 3, level 4 qualities kind of that make it so much more personal, so much more generative and regenerative? And in my experience, it's perfectly doable in a classroom, but you need, of course, some leeway in space, how you build a curriculum around that, right? It can't be just, okay, you need to teach this thing. So you need to create different kind of learning environments. And the way it's absolutely doable, it's absolutely sought for and connecting with students. That's not the shared resource. The resource is most of us are just habitualized and grown up in a different kind of system. So how do you change that? Not by talking about that. You need to experience it. Hence this last picture that we showed, right? So you need to be in a different space, because the moment, to me, I experienced, I remember kind of when I went to MIT, to the Learning Center, and then, you know, the first time one of these workshops where people had suddenly very different conversations than I was used at a higher ed institution or any higher ed institution in Europe. And so it almost works instantly, right? So your body knows already, kind of you feel something very different. And then it's just, aha, this whole thing that I thought was always kind of one way, you can organize the whole damn thing entirely different, right? So the conversations can be something totally different. So I think there's an instant learning, but you have to experience it. You have to see it, and then kind of the mechanisms, how to do that. Of course, once you see it, you can try something, but then what you need is a community of people who also try that. You exchange notes and support each other and so on. So it's kind of the learning by doing, right? You need the experience first, you need some tools, you need some autonomy in your curriculum, kind of that you can do innovative stuff. And of course, you also need physical environments, kind of the way we build so let's look at this room here, right? I mean, yes, I can make you talk. So if this were a workshop, you will go to workshop, we'll go into another place a little later, right? But so you want to have a much more flexible situation, not with fixed chairs and so on, to allow for these types of different learning environments. You need to bring in a lot more of your personal, your own self, your own story, and you bring in kind of different tools. My experience is that young people, but also mid-career executives, kind of when they come to these classes and so on, are extremely open to that. I mean, it's just amazing. And it would have never been the case when I was a student, or even in the years after, right? I think something has really shifted, and you don't know that you are looking for such an environment until you experience it. And then the question then how to replicate that in your own context is pretty straightforward. But what is often missing is the supporting environment for that. And that's, I think, one of the biggest missing elements today. And that's why, I ended with that slide, kind of the new learning infrastructures, right? That's what we need in society, that we need in and around schools and universities. And that's something where the competencies are just in the process of development. But the most important tool is your own self, right? And your own, and I think there's, in my experience, in most universities, there are already people moving into that direction. They already run. Once you open your eyes for that, you will find already very interesting experiments in or around your own higher ed institutions, and connecting with them, that's why we did ULab, right? To basically create a network of these groups that do these kinds of changes. I remember there was one group of in Stockholm School of Economics, so kind of that's the number one school in Northern Europe, kind of where the economic Nobel is awarded and so on. They now, in their bachelor program, inspired by ULab, among others, they have something they call global challenges, right? They basically shrunk the existing curriculum to 66% and say, okay, 1/3 of the new credits is this experiential learning, right? In the beginning, it's learn about and immerse yourself in the new global challenges. And then it's kind of all the deep learning methods, reflection methods, meditation techniques, kind of group conversations and so on. And then it's kind of the prototyping learning by doing. So I think when you look around, you will find these kinds of initiatives, probably also in your environment. And those are the resources we just need to connect with each other a lot more.
Buenísimo. Otto, vamos con una pregunta de una universidad.
Great, Otto. We're going to take another question. From the Metropolitan University of Venezuela. Hicola Lab, you can see them there. You can say hi on the screen. The question is, new theory as a whole, is it applicable to the families as nuclei of society? The family as a whole. Teoría U, is it applicable to families as the nuclei of society, as the core of society?
Yeah, obviously.
Well, there, I would say family, well, there's like two types of families, I would say. There's kind of my, let's say the direct relatives, but then there's also chosen family. And I think kind of that's, I want to extend the nucleus of society is including that for sure. And I think that's, and in both areas and also these combined areas, that is very applicable. What I would say, though, is that often, so there's, so I have seen kind of when you use the Teoría U practices, like of mapping, the 3D, the 4D mapping, so that is 100% applicable kind of to your own personal situation, but it's also really extending the traditional family core towards the chosen family. And at the end of the day, I think what we are really talking about here, what's really necessary is a movement that moves beyond families, right? Moves beyond kind of these closed small groups, and that allows to practice these capacities beyond, right? Where we learn to organize not just with thinking, with people who share our own ideology, but who are on the opposite end of the ideologies practicing, where we begin to collaborations around commons that need all of us to come in. So how to organize around differences and how to extend what we feel comfortable with, right, inside our traditional boundaries. I think that's the main issue today. And that's where Teoría U is most applicable and most useful. So open mind at the end of the day means something very simple. So let me end with this. And there may be a little provocation here in a university. I want to name 3 things that are really overrated today. The first one is knowledge. I say that as someone who spends 50% of his lifetime on knowledge, okay? Why is that overrated? Well, one is the knowing-doing gap, right? You don't solve the knowing-doing gap we all face on this planet right now by more knowledge, particularly not more knowledge of the same type. And in most disruption situation, we need to do what? Access our not knowing. Because most of the stuff that's relevant, we don't know. And yet we need to act. So what is access you're not knowing? It's sensing. It's the whole stuff that moves below the neck in the going down the U that I shared with you. That's why that matters. So the first thing overrated is knowledge. The second thing is that we need to feel comfortable, right? Any learning that keeps you inside your traditional comfort zone, we know that from all leadership training, right, is not real learning. Not going to change your behavior. You need to stretch the edge of your comfort zone beyond your little tribe, be that your family or something else. That's the real issue on the table. And the third one, so accessing a discomfort. If you feel discomfortable, you're on the right path. So that's where we need to turn towards, not away from, because that's where we begin to encounter really different perspectives. That's true for most multi-stakeholder processes I know. And the third one, overrated, is, that one will astonish you most, action. Everyone talks about action now, and so how can we? Yeah. So what's missing when we always talk about act before anything else? Doing nothing. That's most underrated. Doing nothing is most underrated, yet we know that it's the gateway for creativity. If you always start with action, you just kind of habitualize, right? Act on habitualized behavior. If you really want to, the whole deal about presencing is what? Accessing stillness and the deeper knowing that comes from that. What is stillness? It's not doing, right? Not being busy outside. That allows you, that's the container for going deeper and accessing your deeper sources. So those are the three things that in universities, but also in companies are overrated, right? Being comfortable, right? Knowledge and action. Because it's not that we don't know them. That's not what I'm saying, but I think we need to get into a rhythm of, we need to learn how to access the not knowing, how to access discomfort. And we need to know, we need to learn how to access kind of these deeper moments of stillness. And that's exactly what we need to practice in our classrooms. And I have found that the current student generation has a great openness to that.
Gracias, Otto. La verdad que este tema es maravilloso. Thank you, Otto. This is really a wonderful issue. We are going to close with a question from our public. So, wants to ask something?
Hello, Otto. Thank you for being here.
My question is relating to politicians that are necessary for changing. And the game of politics, as I know it, is the game of winning the elections. It's the game of winning the election. And that is really complicated. Well, the proof is what we are living right now everywhere. So I would like to ask you if you have any experience dealing with politicians.
Way too little.
I was afraid that was happening.
So
they don't get interested too much in these things.
So I think that's a very important area.
Creo que es un área muy importante.
I work with governments quite a bit, but not necessarily with the political process as such. And yet, I think that's one of the biggest areas of innovation that we need.
Yeah.
Because the changes, the transformative changes that we need will require new kinds of conversation. I think we need a politics that goes beyond the traditional patterns. And that means we need to bring in more civic and more other voices into the conversation. It really has to do, in my view, with the evolution of democracy and governance. By making democracy, which is in a crisis today, more direct, more distributed, through, more through participative mechanisms that are quite possible through technologies and so forth today, and more dialogic, right? Dialogue in the sense of making systems sense and see themselves. I think we need new spaces, particularly on a local level, they can be prototyped, where these different voices that are missing in the conversation today could have a more meaningful input and influence on our collective decision-making processes today. There are many interesting experiments around these kinds of citizen councils as one, and kind of a whole. I think it's a very significant area where we'll see a lot more innovation going forward and experiments.
Thank you very much. I didn't introduce myself. Alejo del Castillo from Uruguay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bueno, hasta aquí las preguntas. Muchísimas gracias, Otto. Realmente ha sido de una...
Thank you, Otto. This is the end of the questions. This has been extremely enriching, the sharing of the event that closed yesterday.
Vamos a aplaudirlo a Otto.
Let's give a big round of applause to Otto first.
Dani va a hacer entrega de unos regalos.
He is going to deliver some gifts. And before doing that, a gift for Otto and a gift for Laura. And I'd like to tell you that all this that we are trying to experience is what comes now. If you don't pass it through your body and through your hands, it doesn't happen. So for magic to occur, let's get rid of our fear of doing. And after a break, let's proceed to experiencing. Otto, thank you very much. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. We have another gift for Laura.
Tenemos un regalito para Laura, que es de estas viajeras.
Laura is one of these travelers. This gift comes from a traveler who also always give us surprises and joys.
Esto tiene que ver con el arte.
This has to do with art. This has to do with the heart. And this has to do with what was happening there while other things were happening here. During the course of the year, there are going to be activities in the postgraduate center of the School of Economics. We have a workshop, we have different activities, and we will be transmitting all the courses that are available in the methodologies so that we can learn those ways to the heart with which we start emptying ourselves of words and too much thought, and we start working towards the other and towards that future that we want together. And so now we invite you to let this settle. We can go take a break, and then we can go to the experience of experiencing the techniques we have to share.
A la salida pueden ver esta preciosa obra de arte en persona, que la hizo Geisa, vino desde Brasil. Es una obra de arte social emergente. Se va a ir completando con el taller. Pero para ahora...
Micrófono. Sorry, Otto.